Hi, I'm Jan Smith. I'm currently president of the Kentucky Orchid Society, and we are going to present today a seminar on how to repot a Phalaenopsis orchid. Kentucky Orchid Society is a nonprofit that is dedicated to learning and educating people about orchids and how to take care of them. There's more information available on our website at kyorchidsociety.com. So, we'll start today with the Phalaenopsis. Probably the orchid with which you are most familiar is the Phalaenopsis or the moth orchid. There are many beautiful specimens. They come in all kinds of colors. Most Phalaenopsis orchids bloom either on an every 6-month or an every 12-month schedule. So, you've got to be a little patient in between. They usually last about 3 months with regard to their blooms. This Phalaenopsis orchid is what we call an epiphytic plant, meaning it lives on a tree. And as such, they don't want to be in the dirt. Their roots get smothered in the dirt. Most orchids need to be repotted about every 2 to 3 years, particularly if they are in what we call organic media, or a media that might break down. That organic media will eventually rot because it's organic, and as it rots, the pH drops, it becomes more acidic, and that can kill the roots. It also, as it deteriorates, becomes more absorbent of water, so it stays more moist for longer, and if you continue watering it with the same frequency you were initially, you'll eventually provide it too much water. You might also repot it because it's looking poorly, because you're worried about whether the roots are in good shape or not. You might be changing the way you're going to take care of it. You might decide that this is taking far too frequent watering, and I want to go to something that's going to retain water more. Sometimes when you first get an orchid and it blooms for your 3 to 4 months, you will want to unpot it, put it in a medium that you're familiar with, and where you can be sure of what it is setting in. And that's what I usually do after I get one of these orchids from a big box store or from the grocery store. I really want to know what's down in this pot so that I know exactly how to take care of the orchid. Now, I bought this orchid today specifically for the purpose of repotting it for this video. And I wanted to show an orchid that has some problems that you might potentially make you want to unpot it and see what's going on with its roots. So if you look at the blooms on this orchid, first of all, it was supposed to be a very pretty orchid. You can see this is probably the best blossom. It looks fairly good, but everybody else looks a little sad. This one is a little torn blossom, and these are droopy. And if you look, all of these buds are withered, and they're not going to open. They're eventually going to fall off. This orchid has what we call bud blast. Bud blast means that there's been something happen to traumatize the orchid, usually a change in temperature or in growing conditions. It may have been exposed to some cold. It might have been in a very cool area. You can see this at home if you put it in front of the register from your heater, for instance, or your air conditioner. So once you decide where you're going to put your orchid, you'd like to keep it there, and it does need a little air stirring around it, but you don't want it having the heat blow directly on it in the wintertime or the air conditioning in the summertime. So this might make you worry about this orchid. Why does it look this way? Are the roots okay? If you look at the foliage of the orchid, you can see that it is in pretty good shape. It has good turgor. It's not wilted or limp, and it's green. It's not losing leaves. So overall, it looks like it's probably okay in the root system. If you look at the roots on this plant, you can see that they're good and green. The Phalaenopsis roots have chlorophyll in them. They photosynthesize, and they can help produce energy for the plant. So I like to put them in a clear pot so they can continue to photosynthesize. Not all orchid roots do that, and not all are potted in a clear pot. And the roots don't provide as much energy, say, as the leaves do. You can see the surface area is much different. But it's a nice way to check on your plant and to give it a little extra help with regard to producing energy. You can see that there are roots that are coming out of the pot. That's not a bad thing. That's what this plant does naturally. These aerial roots, you should leave as aerial roots. You don't cut them off, and you don't really try to bury them. They'll do fine where they are. They absorb a little moisture from the air, and that's where the plant likes to be. Now, I'm going to show you the things that you need to have before you start potting your orchid. First of all, your equipment needs to be clean. I've cleaned the inside of this with alcohol, just wiped it out with alcohol. And that's just to kill any kind of bacterial, fungus, or viral infection that the last orchid may have had. By that same token, the scissors that I'm going to use, I've also sterilized. And they can be sterilized in a variety of ways. You can soak them in 10% bleach solution. You can soak them in isopropyl alcohol for 15 minutes. Or you can also flame them, which is what I've done, using a handheld blowtorch. Just about 15 seconds in the direct flame from the blowtorch on the blades. Let them cool off so you don't burn yourself or the orchid, and they'll be ready to go. So you have to have scissors because you'll need to groom your orchid. I usually do this with another container, and this container is to catch the debris that's going to come off my orchid so that I don't contaminate my fresh medium. So when you're going to take the root system out of here, you don't know exactly what size root system you're going to have. Sometimes there'll be a lot of dead roots, and you'll end up with a very small root system. Sometimes there'll be more than you think because they're all wound up in there. So I usually try to have a pot that's about the same size available, a pot that is smaller in case I don't have much root system, and a pot that is larger to accommodate a bigger root system. If you notice, all of these pots have a lot of ventilation holes. You can see there are slits on the side and bottom of this pot. So this pot has a lot of holes in the bottom, and that's again because the roots on the orchids are used to being in the air, and they like having the air around them. You can plant orchids in lots of different media. The general rule for these epiphytic plants is that it be an airy medium, so the roots get some air, they get some water, but they're not encased in media in a tight sort of a fashion. You can pot them in bark mixtures, cork, in perlite, combined with your bark mixtures. Sometimes you'll see charcoal in the mixture, sometimes sphagnum moss. There are a variety of things that you can use, and what you use will determine how often you have to water the orchid. This medium is one commercially available online. I purchased it online at a site called repotme.com. I don't have any association with them, but that's where I got it. You can get a standard orchid media from Lowe's, your garden store, and that will be perfectly fine for Phalanopsis. This one happens to be made of bark chips, and bark chips are very commonly part of the media. That's one of the organic components. There is some sphagnum moss, another organic component, and I've moistened that a bit because it's easier to work with. There's some fairly large perlite, which helps keep space and air around the roots. There are some expanded clay beads called Leica, and those beads are inorganic, but they will help retain moisture and also make some air pockets around the orchid. Sometimes you'll see cocoa bark, which is off the coconut fruit itself, that outer bark. But that's about what's in this combination. But it could have a lot of different things in it. In general, you're going to use finer media for orchids that have very fine roots and coarser media for orchids that have big roots. Now, the first thing you're going to have done is to water your orchid. And you want to get the orchid moist because the roots will be softer, more pliable, less likely to fracture and break, and it'll be easier to get this orchid out of the pot. So I'm going to take this orchid over to the faucet and put some water through it so that it will be easier for me to get it out. So now our orchid is moist, and we're going to be able to unpot it and repot it. With this orchid, I'm going to remove its flower spikes. We talked about why it doesn't look very good and isn't going to look very good this blooming season. But hopefully if we treat it correctly, it will look very good a year from now. It will probably bloom with 2 spikes again next year. That is a genetic property of the orchid. So I'm going to remove the stakes that have been holding up the flower spikes. And normally I would just be very careful with these flower spikes if I was deciding to repot this orchid while it still had flowers on it. But since we're not going to do anything with it, it will make it easier to actually remove the spikes. When you do that, and you will remove spikes after they finish blooming anyway, you're going to go to the very base of the spike, and with a pair of sharp scissors, you're going to cut that spike. You'll see the end of it sticking up. We'll go to the other one and cut it as well. Now you've created a wound on that plant, and typically I will put a little cinnamon on that because it will kill any fungus that wants to grow there. We're not going to do that right now. We'll do it at the end because we're going to be fooling around with this plant some more, and we would just end up washing off our cinnamon. So now that we've gotten it moist, we're going to squeeze the pot from different directions to loosen it from the roots. And then you grab this plant by its growing center. And this Phalanopsis are what we call monopodial orchids. They grow from the center up, and all their growth comes out of this top. So the next leaf will come out from where these leaves are. So you give some squeezes and try to get it to release from the pot. Sometimes there are roots sticking out the bottom, which there are here, but that root is dead, so it's not going to cause the problem. And it comes off fairly easily, and that's usually the case with Phalaenopsis. Some orchids are a little more stubborn. Now this plant is actually potted in bark. It's a little broken down, but this is different than what I usually see from the plants that are at the department store or grocery store. They usually are in sphagnum. So it actually might have done fairly well. However, I don't know how long this medium has been on this plant, and it's not going to hurt to have fresh medium, and I'll know exactly how long I've got before I have to repot it again. And basically, because it's moist, the pieces of bark fall off pretty easily. Kind of gently loosen them. If you have a piece that is stuck and really doesn't want to come off, I wouldn't force it. You do sort of create a wound if it's really stuck to that root. The root doesn't want to give it up. And a little bit of old medium isn't going to be a disaster. There's a little bit of sphagnum that was in here, but very little. Predominantly, this was pure bark. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is look for roots that are damaged or are rotten. And most of the time when you unpot an orchid, you'll find several roots that are rotten. I think before I do that, I'm going to rinse it under the water again, because a lot of this debris will come off of the roots and we can see it. Again, just a gentle spray, and try to rinse off as much of the bark as you can get off. It actually can handle more than the gentle spray, so we'll increase the pressure a little bit. And it's pretty clean. So now I can see the pieces that I still need to remove. And I get a better look at the plant itself and the roots. First of all, this plant has a fairly good root system. You can see these roots are green, they're firm, plump, and you can tell that they're alive. You look at this, here's a root, it's not alive. I just touched it and it came off. So clearly that was not alive. We'll check these others. And the best way to do it is just to squeeze. If you gently squeeze and the root has no substance like this root, you can pull it gently and it may come off, like this one's going to. And it often leaves a string, which is actually the root itself. The outside, the green part, is the velamen. So you just take your scissors and cut off that string. And then there's an aerial root, which the end of it is dead. You can see that it's wrinkled and brown. So I'll cut that, and I typically cut that within the brown part so that I don't create a new wound on that plant. It's another little aerial root that's brown. So it looks pretty good. Don't think we need to do much more with this orchid as far as with the root system. Now, so we're going to discard all of this. One more step that I often take is to spray the root system with 3% hydrogen peroxide. This is the hydrogen peroxide that you buy at the store. And just basically give it a good spray, because sometimes there are snails that crawl into orchid plants. And these snails lay their eggs, and they can be very destructive to the orchid. And usually if there are snails, you'll see root tips that have been amputated by the snail's activity. So this is probably pretty good. You listen, you can hear it sizzling or popping. So now we're going to choose a pot to put this orchid in. Here's a pot. It's a little bigger than what we had, and it actually looks fairly good. And you see, once you freed the roots up, they want to expand a little bit. I'll show you what the one that it was, the size it was in, looks like. And that, you could get it back in there, but it's going to be very snug. Now, orchids in general like their pot to be snug, but you want to give it a little room to grow because it will grow. The next thing this orchid will do is put out some new roots, and then after it's put out new roots, it'll put on new leaves, and then it'll go about putting out a spike, a flower spike, so that next year this time it'll be blooming again. So when you take your pot, which has lots of air holes, you put some medium in the bottom. You always want to start with medium in the bottom, and then you position your plant. Now, Phalaenopsis, because they're monopodial, grow from the center, you would like to have your plant in the center of the pot. And I'll leave out this aerial root that was sticking up before. And now we're just going to add our medium. And you just position it. I kind of make sure I have a little bit of sphagnum moss scattered throughout, because the sphagnum moss is going to hold on to some moisture. And in general, the Phalanopsis likes to be a little moist. It doesn't like to be soggy, but it likes having a little moisture. It doesn't like to totally dry out. So we'll try to avoid that. We try to tap down the medium into the pot. You want to fill in the big gaps. You don't have to have it tight. You don't want to be squeezing and damaging roots. So you're just going to try to feed it in there. Tap it down on the table surface as you go. Try to get this medium to go in between these roots. Sometimes it needs a little encouragement from your fingers. You just try to be gentle so that you're not damaging a lot of roots. Typically, you want to have the media snug enough in the pot that you can pick up the pot by the plant. And this is with a plastic pot. If you're potting it in a clay pot, which you could certainly choose to do, you wouldn't be able to pick it up because the clay pot's so heavy. Sometimes you have to stake a plant simply to keep it sitting upright, But this plant looks like it's going to do okay. We could put a stake there just to keep it off to one direction. Try to get it more straight. That might or might not be successful. I just kind of try to gently wiggle this stake in there. Make sure I'm not, hopefully not going through roots. Go a little bit sideways, you can find out. Okay, so I may be able to prop it upright a little bit, keep it more vertical. The next thing you might want to do is, and you should do, is to put the cinnamon on your cut areas of the stem. So it's just a little cinnamon like you'd use to cook. You find your little wounded areas and you dab it with your finger on those wounds. It's a natural anti-fungal agent. It dries out the root or the stem. Okay. You then want to take just a plain label and put information about your plant on this label. This one I put Kroger Phalanopsis yellow, and it was potted for 2720. The next thing you want to do is water your plant. And Phalaenopsis being monopodial, one thing that's important about watering, you want to, anytime you water an orchid, for the most part, you want to really flush the orchid with the water. So you water copiously, but then you're going to let it drain. You don't want to let it sit in water. So you're not going to water it and then sit it in a saucer so it can absorb more water. You're going to let the water drain out from it. With these monopodial orchids, you want to avoid getting water in the crown of the orchid because that can lead to infection. It gets something called crown rot, which is a bacterial infection, and it will pretty much kill your orchid. So after you finish watering, if you have water in the crown, typically I take the end of a paper towel or I take a Q-tip and absorb the water out of that area so that we don't leave a place for that to get the infection. So let's take it over and water it again. The other thing you can do is to shine up your leaves. When you get these, they're often dirty from wherever they've been sitting, sometimes just sitting in your growing space. Sometimes you'll see some water spots. I don't know if you can see those on this plant or not. There's just a few. That's just mineral deposits from the water itself. When the water is absorbed, you get a mineral deposit left. You can use some lemon water, just basically water with about a tablespoon of lemon to a tablespoon of water. Take your paper towel and wipe off the leaves. That will clean up the surface of the plant. You can then use an agent for polishing the plant leaves. The only two things I've used is this organic neem oil, which has some antifungal properties as well. And you just take a little paper towel that's moist and rub it over the leaves to get a really nice shiny surface. You don't go on the bottom of the leaves. That's where the plant's respiratory activity occurs. And you don't want to plug up those pores through which it breathes, as it were. That will make the other thing you can use is just a little mayonnaise on a moist paper towel. And again, you just rub over the leaves to shine them up. With this particular media, I'll water it about twice a week. And again, I do it just like we showed. You take it under your faucet and run the water all through it. Let it drain out on your countertop. Then if you want to put it inside a decorative pot, just go set it inside the decorative pot. Don't let it sit in water in the decorative pot. You want to have that water having drained out. And you can check if you pick up your pot and you feel what it's like now when it's wet, then you can check it in 3 or 4 days and see what it feels light. If it's very light, then it is dry. And you can also check the roots. And these roots are very green right now, but as I said, they'll turn silver when they're dry. And once those roots turn silver, that tells you that you need to water the plant again. You want it in a place that's going to get what we call low to intermediate light. So about what you would use for African violets. Usually an east window is good. They will sunburn, so you don't want them in direct middle of the day light. It's better not to be in a west window unless you've got a sheer in that window between the plant and the sunlight. They like being outdoors in the summer, in a protected area. So last year I had the ones I showed you a moment ago in the shade on the porch. So they were protected from Mother Nature's rain because I can't control that. And they were protected from direct sun. And they did very, very well. They put on more flowers when they are hot in the summer. And so that's one of the reasons there are quite a few flowers on those particular plants. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned a little bit about how to take care of your orchid. And we'd love to see you at our meetings. Go to our website at KentuckyOrchidSociety.com. Thank you.